She was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in a quiet town where people knew each other by name. Her parents were ordinary people who never imagined their small apartment would one day echo with music that could silence an entire hall. They didn't come from a family of musicians. Her father worked long hours fixing broken machines, and her mother spent most of her day at a sewing shop. But from the moment their daughter could crawl, they noticed something unusual about her. When other babies cried for toys, she cried for sound. She would sit near the old television, completely still, listening to the jingles of commercials, the background music in movies, the hum of the refrigerator. Sometimes she would tap her fingers in rhythm against the floor. Her parents thought it was just a cute habit. But the more they watched her, the more they realized she was not just tapping. She was following patterns. She was trying to make sense of the sounds around her. When she turned 3, her father brought home a small plastic keyboard he found at a thrift shop. It had missing stickers and half of its keys didn't even work. Still, it became her favorite thing in the world. The moment she touched it, something changed in the house. She pressed the keys one by one, her eyes wide with focus as if she was discovering a secret language. Every sound made her smile. Within a few days, she was playing the melody of a song she had heard on television. No one had shown her how to do it. She had simply listened, remembered, and played. Her parents were shocked. They called their neighbors to watch. Everyone stood around, amused and amazed as the tiny girl repeated the same tune again and again, each time getting the notes closer to perfect. It was the first time anyone realized she might be different. From that day, music became a part of her daily life. While other children spent their afternoons playing outside or watching cartoons, she would sit on the floor beside her little keyboard, humming and pressing keys. Her mother often had to remind her to eat or sleep. There was something about music that made her forget time. At 4 years old, she started to hum along to classical pieces she accidentally found on the radio. She didn't know the composers' names or understand what classical meant. She only knew that those sounds made her feel something. She could sense the sadness in slow pieces, the excitement in fast ones. It was as if she could hear emotions hidden in the notes. When she started preschool, her teachers noticed her quiet nature. She rarely spoke in class, but whenever there was music time, she came alive. The teacher would hand out small percussion instruments, and while the other children hit them without rhythm, she somehow found the beat every time. The teacher told her parents, "Your daughter has a special ear. She listens differently." By the time she turned 5, her parents decided to buy her a real piano. Of course, a brand new one was far beyond what they could afford. So they searched for months until they found a second-hand upright piano being sold cheaply by an old music teacher who was moving away. It had scratches on the side and a few dull keys, but to the little girl it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The day the piano arrived, she didn't wait. She ran her small hands across the keys, pressing each one carefully. The sound filled the living room, and she smiled the same wide smile she had at 3 years old. That evening, while her parents cooked dinner, they heard the sound of a familiar tune. She was playing a song she had heard on a commercial just once earlier that week. Every note was correct. Every pause was right. Her parents stood in silence at the kitchen door, listening. It was as if the old piano had been waiting all its life for her to arrive. They tried to find a piano teacher, but lessons were expensive. The nearest music school charged more than they could pay in a month, so they found another way. Her father would bring home printed sheets of music he downloaded from the library computers. Her mother sat beside her, helping her sound out the letters and numbers on the sheets. Together they learned. The little girl never complained. She didn't need fancy lessons or expensive books. She learned by watching videos online. She would slow them down, study the hand movements, and try them on her piano. When she couldn't reach certain keys, she found creative ways to stretch her fingers. She would practice until her hands felt tired and her eyes began to close, then wake up early the next morning and start again. Her parents began to notice that she was not just memorizing notes, she was understanding them. She could hear a song once and instantly tell if a note was wrong. She could even tell what key a random sound was in, like the beep of a microwave or the ring of a phone. One evening, her father asked her how she knew which notes to play. She looked up and said softly, "The piano tells me." It wasn't arrogance. It was innocence. She truly believed the piano was speaking to her. When she turned 6, she entered her first local music contest. It was held in a small community hall, and most of the participants were older children who had been taking lessons for years. Her parents didn't expect her to win. They just wanted her to experience performing. But when her turn came, she walked up to the piano with calm confidence, adjusted the small stool, and began to play a piece she had learned entirely by ear. The audience fell silent within seconds. Her fingers moved smoothly, her eyes focused on the keys, her expression calm but full of emotion. When she finished, there was a long pause, the kind of silence that happens when people are too stunned to clap. Then came the applause. That night, the judges called her name as the first-place winner. Her parents were in tears. Reporters from a local newspaper wrote a short article about the little girl who plays like a pro. It was the first time her story reached beyond her small town. After that, invitations started to come. Small events, local recitals, charity concerts. Everywhere she played, people said the same thing. She doesn't just play the piano, she makes it speak. But behind the applause and attention, life at home stayed simple. Her parents still couldn't afford fancy lessons, so they continued to help her in their own way. Her father would tap his fingers on the table to help her learn rhythm. Her mother would hum along as she practiced. And late at night, when the world was quiet, she would sit at the piano, listening to the soft sound of the keys as if they were whispering secrets. Sometimes she would stop playing, close her eyes, and just listen to the silence. To her, silence was not empty. It was full of waiting sounds. Her teachers at school often said she seemed distracted, but it wasn't because she wasn't paying attention. Her mind was always busy with music, melodies she hadn't yet played, songs she wanted to create. By 7, she could read sheet music faster than most adults. She could also write her own simple compositions, little songs inspired by things she saw every day: the rain hitting the window, the sound of birds in the morning, the rhythm of footsteps on the stairs. Her parents began recording her playing so they could send videos to music programs in bigger cities. Some teachers offered free online lessons after seeing her talent. They were amazed by how quickly she learned and how deeply she understood each piece. One teacher even said she doesn't play like a child. She plays like someone who's lived through a lifetime of music. Still, she never acted proud or distant. She remained shy, often hiding behind her mother when people praised her. When someone asked her how she managed to play so well, she would only say, "I just listen carefully." Listening. That was her secret. She listened to everything, to people talking, to the wind through the window, to the rhythm of her own heartbeat. To her, everything in the world was music waiting to be found. Sometimes, when her father came home late from work, tired and quiet, she would play something soft and peaceful. He would sit on the couch, close his eyes, and smile. The worries of the day would fade away as her fingers danced gently across the keys. In those moments, music was not just sound, and it was comfort. One evening, as she finished playing, her father said, "One day, the world will know your music." She looked at him, smiled, and said, "The world already does. They just haven't heard it yet." No one could have known how right she was, because within a few short years, that same little girl from a small town would do something that even the most experienced pianists had never done, something that would leave judges speechless and an entire world amazed. But before that moment came, her story began simply, with a broken keyboard, a curious mind, and a heart that could hear music where others heard noise. By the time the little girl turned 7, her home had changed. Not in size or furniture, but in sound. Every corner of the small apartment carried a melody. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was part of the family. Her father would often say, "This house breathes music now." And he was right. Each morning started the same way. Before the sun rose, she would sit at the piano, her hair still messy from sleep, and begin to play quietly so she wouldn't wake her parents. The sound of her fingers touching the keys was soft and thoughtful, like a child whispering secrets to an old friend. The piano seemed to understand her mood. When she was happy, it sang. When she was tired, it sighed. Her parents watched her with pride, but also a little worry. They could see how much she loved music, but they also knew how hard the world could be for someone with big dreams and little money. Her father worked extra hours, sometimes skipping dinner just to save enough for new music sheets or piano maintenance. Her mother began sewing for longer hours to afford better internet, so their daughter could watch music lessons online. Every small thing they did revolved around helping her grow. They didn't talk about it much, but both of them believed she had something rare, something worth protecting. She spent hours each day practicing. It wasn't forced. No one had to tell her to do it. In fact, her parents sometimes had to remind her to take breaks. She would get so lost in her playing that she'd forget to eat or drink. Her fingers would move faster and faster, her eyes following every note like she was solving a secret puzzle only she could understand. But what made her special wasn't just her speed or skill. It was the way she felt the music. If she played a sad song, her face changed. Her eyes softened, her breathing slowed, and every note sounded like a sigh. When she played a happy tune, her whole body moved with it. A small smile on her face, her shoulders rising and falling to the rhythm. People who heard her said she didn't just play. She became the music. At school, she didn't talk much about her piano. Most of her classmates didn't even know how talented she was. She was quiet and polite, always sitting in the back, doodling tiny music notes in her notebook. But during school talent shows, everything changed. One year, she decided to perform a short piano piece she had written herself. When her name was called, she walked calmly to the stage, even though her heart was beating fast. The piano was old, a bit out of tune, but she didn't mind. She sat down, closed her eyes for a second, and began to play. The melody was simple but beautiful. It told a story of a little girl sitting by the window, watching raindrops fall, dreaming about something bigger. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then everyone began to clap. Some of her classmates even stood up. From that day, she wasn't just the quiet girl anymore. She was the girl who could make the piano talk. As the months passed, she started entering more local competitions. Each one was bigger than the last. Some were held in nearby towns. Others required long bus rides. Her father would carry her sheet music in a worn-out folder, while her mother packed sandwiches and water bottles for the trip. They didn't have fancy clothes or a car, but they had belief. Belief that their daughter's gift was meant to be shared. At each competition, she faced kids who had been taking professional lessons for years. Many had personal tutors and expensive pianos at home. She had only her second-hand upright piano and her unshakable focus. Before every performance, she would sit quietly, her hands resting in her lap. She never seemed nervous. While others practiced loudly backstage, she closed her eyes and imagined the song in her head. Sometimes her fingers moved in the air, tracing invisible keys. When it was her turn, she always walked on stage with calm steps. The moment she began to play, everything else disappeared. The audience, the lights, the judges. It was just her and the piano. At one competition, she played a difficult classical piece that was known to challenge even adults. Halfway through, the power went out. The room went dark and silent. People gasped, unsure what to do, but she didn't stop. She kept playing. Her fingers found every note perfectly, even without seeing the keys. When she finished, the audience lit the room with their phone flashlights and gave her a standing ovation. That day, the judges said something no one forgot. You don't teach that. You feel it. Her story began spreading beyond her small town. Local newspapers wrote about her again. A few music teachers reached out, offering free lessons online. She started learning advanced techniques, finger control, dynamics, expression, but she never lost her natural touch. She always said, I play what I feel, not just what I see. Still, she remained humble. After every show, she would bow politely, thank the judges, and quietly return home. She didn't ask for prizes or praise. She only wanted to play better than yesterday. At home, her life stayed the same. The walls were still thin, the furniture still old, but the piano remained her favorite thing in the world. Some nights she would stay up late, practicing in the dim light of a single lamp. Her parents often found her asleep beside the piano, her head resting on the keys. The soft, uneven sound of the keys under her breathing became a nightly lullaby in the house. There were hard days too. Times when she got frustrated because her fingers couldn't do what her mind imagined. Times when the piano needed repairs they couldn't afford. Once, a key broke during her practice and she cried quietly, feeling as though a friend had gotten hurt. Her father fixed it the next day with glue and patience, saying, "A broken key can still make music if you believe in it." She smiled and hugged him, and from then on, that repaired key became her favorite. She also started composing more, not full songs, just small melodies that came to her naturally. She wrote them in a small notebook using her own way of marking notes. She called them heart sounds. Every time she felt something, joy, sadness, even curiosity, she turned it into a tune. One evening, while her mother cooked dinner, she played one of her new melodies. It was soft and slow like a lullaby. Her mother stopped stirring the soup and listened quietly. "What's that called?" she asked. The girl smiled and said, "It doesn't have a name. It's just the sound of today." The next day, her father recorded her playing that melody on his old phone. He said, "One day, when the world hears you, I'll tell them this was the first song that made me cry." When she turned 8, her name started appearing in small music magazines. People began calling her a young prodigy. It sounded strange to her. She didn't think of herself that way. She just loved music. She often said, "I don't want to be famous. I just want to play." But fame has a way of finding those who don't chase it. One afternoon, she received an invitation to a national-level competition. It was much bigger than anything she had ever done before. The best young pianists from across the country would be there. Children trained in top music schools, some already recognized on television. Her parents were proud but nervous. The entry fee, travel costs, and accommodation were all too much. But they didn't want her to miss the chance, so her father took an extra job for a few weeks and her mother borrowed money from a friend. They didn't tell her the details. They just said, "We'll make it work." When the day finally came, they packed a small bag, her music sheets, and the same dress she'd worn in all her competitions. The journey took hours, but she didn't complain. She spent the entire trip humming softly, imagining the piano she would soon play. When they arrived at the competition hall, she was amazed. It was huge, polished floors, shining lights, and hundreds of people. The pianos were grand, black, and glossy. She had never played one like that before. She didn't seem scared, though. She just walked around quietly, studying everything. While other contestants stretched their fingers and showed off difficult scales, she sat on a chair near the wall, gently tapping her knees to a rhythm only she could hear. Her parents watched her from a distance, their hearts full. Whatever happened, they were proud. Their daughter had come far, not because of luck, but because of passion, hard work, and endless love for her music. They didn't know it yet, but this competition would change everything. In that hall, she would soon face something completely new, a challenge that no one believed could be done. Something that would test not just her talent, but her understanding of music itself. And when it happened, the world would finally see what her parents had known all along, that their quiet little girl from a small town wasn't just good at playing piano. She was something else entirely. The competition hall was filled with a kind of nervous energy that only big moments create. The lights were bright. The sound of footsteps echoed across the polished floor, and the soft murmur of voices filled the air. Everywhere she looked, there were children dressed neatly, holding sheet music, stretching their fingers, whispering to their teachers or parents. She sat quietly in a corner, her small hands resting on her lap, watching everything with calm eyes. To her, it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like another place where she could let her heart speak through the piano. Her parents stood near the back, a little anxious but proud. They knew she wasn't like the others, not trained by famous teachers, not wearing an expensive dress. But they also knew what she carried inside her was something no money could buy. The competition was divided into several rounds. The first few were simple, where contestants had to play well-known classical pieces. She passed them easily. Each time she sat down to play, the audience seemed to lean forward, drawn in by something they couldn't explain. Her music didn't just fill the room, it softened it, like a warm breeze moving through a crowd. When she finished her second round, one of the judges, an older man with silver hair, looked at her in silence for a long moment. He finally said, "You play like you already know what the music feels before you touch the keys." She didn't fully understand what that meant, but she smiled politely and bowed. By the time she reached the final round, only a handful of contestants remained. The last challenge was different, something no one had expected. The judges announced that they had prepared a special test piece, one that wasn't part of the planned program. It was a brand new composition written by a modern composer known for creating difficult, almost impossible pieces. The audience murmured. Even the older students looked nervous. Some whispered that the piece had never been performed completely by anyone. It had uneven rhythm, strange timing, and unpredictable changes. The judges said that whoever could perform it correctly, or even come close, would show true mastery. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage quietly, holding her music sheet. The light seemed brighter than before. The grand piano stood under a soft golden glow, waiting. She placed the sheet on the stand and looked at it carefully. The notes were strange, scattered like puzzle pieces that didn't fit. There were sudden jumps, odd pauses, and markings that didn't make much sense. She frowned slightly, not from fear but from curiosity. One of the judges, trying to be kind, leaned forward and said, "It's all right if you skip this piece, dear. It's meant for advanced students." She looked up at him, her voice soft but firm. "I want to try." The hall went quiet. Everyone watched as she took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and placed her hands on the keys. Then, without counting or hesitating, she began to play. At first, the sound was quick, sharp, and almost wild. Her fingers moved faster than anyone expected, but there was control in every motion. The piece that had seemed impossible suddenly made sense. The chaos turned into rhythm. The scattered notes connected into a melody no one had heard before. In less than 3 seconds, she finished the entire passage, the most complex section of the piece. Her hand stopped at the exact moment the final note echoed softly into silence. The entire hall froze. No one clapped. No one spoke. Even the judges stared at her, unsure if what they had just seen was real. It wasn't just that she had played fast. She had understood something in that music that others couldn't see. She had found the pattern hidden beneath the mess. The chief judge finally leaned toward his microphone. His voice trembled slightly. "Could you play that again?" She nodded gently, placed her fingers back on the keys, and did it once more, this time even more beautifully. The impossible piece sounded effortless, clear, and strangely emotional, as though the music had been waiting for her to bring it to life. When she stopped, the silence that followed felt endless. Then one by one people began to clap, softly at first, then louder until the whole room was on its feet. Some of the judges stood too, clapping slowly, still trying to understand what had just happened. Her parents were frozen in their seats. Her mother had tears in her eyes, and her father's hands shook slightly as he tried to record the moment on his old phone. The girl didn't seem surprised by the applause. She simply bowed politely as she always did and walked off the stage quietly. Backstage, some of the other contestants came to her, curious and a little in awe. One of them asked, "How did you learn that piece?" "No one can play it." She smiled softly and said, "I listened to it in my head. It made sense there." The boy frowned. "But you only looked at it for a few seconds." She shrugged lightly. "That's all I needed." The judges called her back for questions. They wanted to know how she had managed it. She explained in her small, calm voice that when she looked at the sheet, she didn't see it as separate notes. She saw shapes, patterns, and movements. "It's like the music talks," she said. "It tells me where to go next." Her words sounded simple, but everyone in the room could tell there was something extraordinary about her way of thinking. That night, her name spread across the hall. Parents, teachers, and even musicians whispered about the little girl who solved the unsolvable piece. Reporters who had come to cover the event rushed to find her parents. Asking for interviews, her father didn't say much. He only said, "She just loves music." That's all. The next morning, newspapers carried her photo, a small girl sitting at a piano, her face calm and focused. The headlines spoke of her as a musical genius, someone with a rare gift. But at home, nothing changed. When they returned, she went straight to her piano, the same old one with the repaired key. She sat down and started playing again, humming softly. Her mother laughed and said, "You just played for a hall full of people and now you're back here again." She looked up and smiled. The piano missed me. Her parents couldn't help but laugh. To her, fame didn't mean much. What mattered was the sound of the keys under her fingers, the quiet moments where she could listen and create. But word of her performance continued to spread. Videos of her playing were shared online. People around the world watched in awe as this young girl from a small town played an impossible piece like it was a simple song. Soon, invitations started coming, from music schools, talent shows, and orchestras. Some wanted her to perform. Others wanted her to study under top pianists. Her parents were overwhelmed. They didn't know which opportunities to accept. All they knew was that their daughter was happy as long as she was near a piano. In one interview, when a journalist asked her what she thought about becoming famous, she said quietly, "Music doesn't belong to one person. It's for everyone who listens." The simplicity of her words touched millions. People commented that she was wise beyond her years. But for her, it wasn't wisdom, it was truth. She didn't play to be special. She played because it made her feel alive. Even the composer of the impossible piece eventually reached out. He admitted that when he wrote it, he never expected anyone to truly perform it. "I created it as a test," he said. And she didn't just pass it, she understood it. The next time she performed that same piece, it was on a much bigger stage. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, including some of the greatest musicians in the country. Yet she walked onto the stage as calmly as always. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. This time it wasn't just about showing skill. It was about showing heart. Every note carried emotion. Every pause had meaning. And when she reached the final chord, she held it for a moment longer, letting the sound fade like a whisper that lingered in the air. When the applause erupted again, her eyes shone under the lights. But she didn't look proud. She looked grateful. That night when she returned home, her parents asked her how it felt to play for so many people. She thought for a moment and said, "It felt the same. The piano still sounds like home." Her father smiled. "You know, you might have changed how people see music." She tilted her head. "I didn't change it. I just listened." And maybe that was her real secret. She listened not only to the music but to the silence between the notes. The space where feelings lived. That small girl, who once played on a broken keyboard in a tiny room, had done something the world thought was impossible. She didn't do it with arrogance or pride. She did it with the same quiet love she had since she was 3 years old. The love of a child who found magic in sound. The sound of the final note faded, and the hall became completely silent. No whisper, no cough, not even the creak of a chair. It was as if the whole room had forgotten how to breathe. The girl sat there, her small hand still resting on the piano keys, her eyes lowered. She didn't look nervous or proud. She looked peaceful, like someone who had finally said what she came to say. The judges sat frozen in their seats. The piece she had just played wasn't supposed to be playable. Musicians had spent years trying to understand it. Yet this small child had not only played it, she had made it sound beautiful. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the camera crew stood still, unsure whether to record the silence or the miracle that had just happened. Then, slowly, one of the older judges stood up. He was the same man who had told her earlier that she could skip the piece if she wanted. His eyes were moist, his hands trembling slightly as he began to clap. The sound of his applause echoed through the empty silence. One by one, the other judges joined in. The audience followed until the room was filled with the sound of clapping and cheering. People stood from their seats. Some wiped their eyes. Parents lifted their children so they could see her better. It wasn't just admiration, and it was pure emotion. They knew they had witnessed something rare, something that words couldn't describe. She stood and bowed gently the way she always did. Then she walked off the stage with small, calm steps, her expression unchanged. Backstage, the noise of applause still thundered behind her. Her parents ran to meet her. Her mother wrapped her in a hug so tight that the girl laughed softly. Her father's eyes glistened with tears he tried to hide. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled and said, "It was just music." To her, it really was that simple. She didn't think about records or headlines or fame. She had only done what she loved most, listening, feeling, and playing. Later that evening, after all the performances were finished, the judges gathered everyone back into the hall for the awards. The lights dimmed and the air was filled with quiet anticipation. When they called her name as the grand winner, the crowd erupted again. She walked slowly to the stage, her tiny hands clutching the trophy that looked far too big for her to hold. The head judge handed it to her and said into the microphone, "Sometimes music reminds us that talent isn't about age or training. It's about soul. And tonight we saw a soul that understands music deeper than most adults ever will." The audience cheered again. She smiled politely, bowed, and walked back down to where her parents were waiting. Her mother kissed her forehead and her father whispered, "Let's go home." On the train ride back, she sat by the window watching the lights of the city pass by. The trophy sat beside her, shining under the soft yellow train light. But she didn't look at it much. Her fingers moved silently on her lap as if still playing the piece in her mind. Her parents watched her quietly, not wanting to disturb her. After a while, her mother asked softly, "What were you thinking about on stage?" She looked up and said, "I was thinking about the sound of rain on our window." Her mother smiled. That answer made perfect sense. The music she had played, though complicated and strange, had felt like rain. Unpredictable, yet somehow peaceful. When they reached home, it was already late. The neighborhood was quiet. The girl carried her small bag inside and walked straight to her piano. She placed her hands on the keys and played a few soft notes. It was almost like she was saying hello again. Her parents stood in the doorway, watching her with tired but happy smiles. The next morning, everything felt different, but not for her. For her, life went on as usual. She woke early, ate breakfast, and sat at the piano again. The old wooden floor creaked under her feet, and the soft light from the window fell across the keys. It was the same as it had always been. But outside their home, the world had started to take notice. Videos of her performance had spread online overnight. People shared them with captions like "the 8-year-old who played the impossible song" and "the child who heard what others couldn't." Within days, her name appeared on television, in newspapers, and across social media. Reporters began calling. Music teachers sent letters. One even said that her performance had changed how people see the limits of talent. Her parents didn't quite know how to handle all the attention. They were proud, of course, but they wanted to protect her from all the noise. When someone asked her father what they planned to do next, he said, "We'll do what we've always done. Let her play." A few weeks later, she was invited to perform again, this time at a special concert organized by the same competition committee. They wanted her to play the same impossible piece in front of a larger audience, musicians, critics, and even some famous composers. When the night of the concert came, the hall was filled with people. Some had flown in from other countries just to see her. Cameras lined the back of the room. The lights were warm and golden, and the piano waited under a single spotlight. She walked onto the stage slowly, holding her little sheet of music, though everyone knew she didn't need it. She sat down, took a quiet breath, and looked out at the crowd. She could see hundreds of faces, but she didn't feel nervous. To her, it was still just her and the piano. When she began to play, the hall fell silent again. The first notes floated through the air, gentle, precise, and full of meaning. Each sound seemed to tell a story, one that everyone understood even if they couldn't explain it. She didn't just play fast this time. She played with feeling, stretching each moment, giving life to every pause. The composer of the piece sat in the front row. He had written it years ago as a challenge, never expecting anyone to truly perform it. As he listened, tears filled his eyes. He realized that she had found something in his music that even he had missed, the emotion hidden beneath the complexity. When she finished, there was that same silence again, the kind of silence that holds everything. Then the applause came, louder than ever. Some people stood, some cried. The composer himself went on stage, knelt beside her, and whispered something only she could hear. She nodded shyly, smiled, and bowed again. After the concert, as they were leaving, a journalist stopped her and asked, "How do you feel knowing you've done something no one else could?" She looked thoughtful for a moment and said, "I didn't try to do something others couldn't. I just tried to listen to what the music wanted." That answer spread everywhere the next day. People were amazed not only by her talent but by her humility. She wasn't chasing fame or trying to prove anything. She was simply being herself, a child who loved sound and silence equally. Back home, things stayed simple. Her parents didn't buy anything new. They didn't move houses or start living differently. The only thing that changed was that now, their small living room was sometimes filled with visitors, journalists, teachers, and curious musicians. Some brought gifts, others came to learn from her, but she treated everyone the same. She still played every morning, still hummed softly when she cooked with her mother, still helped her father fix little things around the house. The piano, though slightly worn now, still sounded as alive as ever. One evening, her father found her sitting quietly by the window, looking out at the sunset. He asked, "You've played for so many people now. Don't you ever get tired? She smiled and shook her head. Music doesn't make me tired. It makes me rest. He nodded slowly, realizing how true that was. For her, music wasn't work. It was home. That night she played something new. Not a competition piece, not a famous song, but something simple and soft. Her parents listened from the next room. It sounded like a memory, like all the laughter and struggles of their little family turned into notes. When she finished, she said quietly, "I think I understand music more now." Her mother asked, "What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands. "It's not about being perfect. It's about saying what you feel without words." Her mother smiled, wiping her eyes. "Then you've been doing that all along." The girl laughed, and the piano gave one last gentle sound for the night. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that her journey was only beginning. There would be more concerts, more people, more challenges, but none of it scared her, because she had already faced the hardest part, not the impossible piece, but the moment of silence before anyone clapped, when all she had was faith in her music. That silence had taught her everything she needed to know. It taught her that music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something pure. It taught her that even when the world is quiet, beauty can still be heard. And most of all, it reminded her that no matter how big the stage or how bright the lights, the truest sound always begins in the heart. Years passed, but the sound of that night, the applause, the whispers, the quiet after her final note, never truly left her. It became a part of her, like the steady beat of her own heart. The little girl who once played on a second-hand piano in a small apartment grew older, taller and wiser. Yet no matter how far life took her, she never stopped seeing herself as that same curious child who simply loved to listen. As the years went by, her story spread around the world. People called her a genius, a miracle child, even a once-in-a-generation prodigy. But she never liked those words. Whenever someone praised her, she would only smile and say, "I'm still learning." Music schools began inviting her to visit. Some wanted her to perform. Others wanted her to talk to their students. She didn't always say yes. She preferred quiet places where she could play freely, without lights or cameras. But sometimes when she did agree, the halls would fill with young musicians eager to see her. One day at one of those schools, a little boy came up to her. He was about 7, nervous and shy, holding a small keyboard under his arm. He asked softly, "How do you play without being scared?" She smiled and bent down to his level. "I get scared too," she said. "But I don't think about people when I play. I think about what the music wants to say. Once you listen to it, the fear gets smaller." The boy nodded, and she could see in his eyes that he understood. That moment meant more to her than any trophy she had ever received, because that was what music truly was for her. Connection, not competition. Her parents watched all of this quietly, always staying behind the scenes. They still lived in the same small house with the same old piano, though now the keys had lost some of their shine. Her father would sometimes sit by the window and say, "You've brought the whole world into this little room." She would laugh softly and reply, "It was already here. I just helped them hear it." But fame has a way of chasing those who don't look for it. Reporters kept calling. Producers offered her contracts, and sponsors tried to make her the face of their brands. Her parents refused most of it. They wanted her to stay free, to play when she wanted, not when someone told her to. One summer, she was invited to perform in another country, in a grand hall that could seat thousands. It was her first time traveling so far from home. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights were bright and the piano looked almost too perfect, polished like glass. She played beautifully that night, but afterward, she felt different. The crowd was loud, the cameras were flashing, and people kept asking for pictures. On the flight home, she looked out the window and said softly to her mother, "It was beautiful, but I think I like our piano better." Her mother smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. When they returned home, she went straight to her piano, ran her hands across the old wood, and whispered, "I missed you." Then she played a quiet tune, simple but full of warmth. Her parents listened from the kitchen, and her father said, "This is the one we'll remember." The following year, she began writing her own music, not to impress anyone, but because melodies kept coming to her, in the sound of the rain, the rustling of trees, even the rhythm of her own footsteps. She started keeping a small notebook by the piano. Each page was filled with notes, scribbles, and tiny drawings. Sometimes she would fall asleep beside the piano, and her mother would gently cover her with a blanket. Other times, she'd wake up in the middle of the night and write down a few notes before they slipped away from her mind. One of her first compositions was inspired by her childhood, a piece that started with a soft hum, like the sound of wind through a window, and slowly grew into something full and bright. When she played it for the first time at a small gathering, people wept. They said it felt like remembering something beautiful they'd forgotten. She didn't say much in response. She just smiled and whispered, "That's what I hoped it would do." Her music began to take on a life of its own. People played her pieces in recitals and shared recordings online. Some said her songs helped them through hard times. One message from a listener said, "I was going through something very dark, but your music gave me light again." She read that message several times. Then she placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "That's why I play." As she grew older, her understanding of music deepened. She started teaching small groups of children, not with strict rules or pressure, but with gentleness. She told them to close their eyes, listen, and play what they felt. One day, a student played a few wrong notes and looked embarrassed. She smiled and said, "There are no wrong notes and only ones that haven't found their home yet." Her way of teaching became known for its warmth and simplicity. People said she didn't just teach music, she taught how to listen, not just with ears, but with the heart. Years later, when she was invited to give a special concert to mark the anniversary of her first big win, she hesitated. The same judges were there, older now, and the same hall had been restored. But this time she wasn't a child anymore. She had lived, loved, and learned what music truly meant. When she walked onto that stage again, it felt like meeting an old friend. She sat down, placed her hands gently on the keys, and took a long breath. The first note she played was soft, almost like a whisper. The melody that followed was one she had written herself, called "The Silence Before Applause." It wasn't fast or showy. It was calm, honest, and full of emotion. Each note carried the weight of her journey, from the small apartment to this grand stage, from a little girl with curious fingers to a woman who spoke through sound. When she finished, the hall was silent once more, just like all those years ago. But this time she didn't wait for applause. She simply smiled, stood, and bowed. Then, before the clapping could begin, she walked off the stage quietly. Outside in the empty corridor, her father waited for her with a soft smile. His hair was grayer now, and his eyes carried years of pride and love. "You played beautifully," he said. She looked at him and replied, "Thank you for letting me play when no one was watching." He nodded slowly. That's when the music was born. Later that night, she sat by her piano again, the same one she had always had. She opened her notebook and added one last page. On it, she wrote, "Music isn't about how fast you play or how many people listen. It's about feeling something true and letting it live through sound." She closed the book gently and played one final song before bed. A soft, peaceful tune that seemed to drift into the night air. Outside, the world kept moving, the cars, people, noise. But inside that little house, the notes floated like light. Her parents listened quietly from the hallway, smiling at each other. They knew this was who she was meant to be. Over the next few years, she continued to write, perform, and teach. But no matter how famous she became, she always returned home to that same piano. It had scratches, worn keys, and a soft hum that only she could hear. To her, it was perfect. One afternoon, a group of young students came to visit her. They asked her what her secret was and how she became so great at playing. She looked at them for a long moment and then said softly, "I never tried to be great. I just tried to listen. Music is already perfect. You just have to hear it." They nodded, even if they didn't fully understand yet. But one day they would. That evening, after everyone left, she sat alone by the piano again. The sun was setting, painting the room in golden light. She touched the keys gently and smiled. She remembered the first time she had played that impossible piece. The fear, the silence, the wonder. It all felt like yesterday, and for the first time, she realized that it had never really been about proving anything. It was always about hearing something deeper, something that lived inside her all along. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And then she played, and not for the judges, not for the cameras, not for the world, but for herself. The notes were soft, tender, and full of peace. They filled the room, the house, the night, until all that was left was the same beautiful silence that had followed her every great performance. A silence that wasn't empty. A silence that meant everything.